Hi, I'm Lala. I'm from Sandakan in the East Coast. Just to say, I've been dabbling in history for some time, and it's more like a hobby. And I think for everybody, we all have our own personal narratives, and we all can link up to history. But the only problem is with in schools, as you know, you're very disconnected from what's happened. So in today's talk, I will actually going to be a bit factual in the beginning because it helps to know how we got into this mess in the first place. So we're going back to the 18th century secession treaties. So I've got to start this talk with this quote. It's an amazing quote that I came across. It says by J.R. Tompkins, who's an author, "History doesn't move you more than when it's in the iron of your veins." So we are all in a way we have a DNA link. Huh? Sorry, history doesn't move you more than when it's in the iron of your veins.
In the iron of your veins.
Yeah, the blood. In your blood. Maybe, hopefully in this session, I know I'm going to be quite factual in the beginning, is that you can link up to history through your DNA and through the iron of your veins. But in the beginning, we need to know what happened in the beginning. So I'm going to start with the Sulu zone. And once upon a time, there was a maritime kingdom called Sulu, which is down here. It's not quite just in Sabah. It's a maritime network of trading partnerships leading from the Sulu Sea to the Philippines and Eastern Kalimantan, as you can tell. It's facilitated by a 15th century sultanate. So that's how long the Sultanate of Sulu was. 15th century, I think it was 1480, based on the island of Holo or Lupasuk. And it was founded by the first Sultan, Abu Bakr. Its main trading partner is actually China, and trade is fueled through marine exotics, trepang, pearls, pearl shell, tortoise shell, from the depths of the Sulu Sea, and a myriad of natural forest products from our deep jungle, such as bird's nest, rattan, and of course the world's finest camphor. And interesting, I'm just going to add to this. Camphor is a resin from the kapur tree, kapur minyak. And this is used to embalm bodies, to make incense. And it's had a high demand in Arabia and China, and that's how they came across. So that brought the early Arab traders up in the northern part of Sabah, where they were harvesting kapur, especially from northeastern Sabah. And in return, the Chinese gave them textiles, ceramics, earthenware, brassware, and arms. The trade with China was recorded as early as the Ming dynasty, where East Sulu king, that was before even the founding of the Sultanate, actually paid tribute to the Emperor Zudi, who was the Yongle emperor at that time. And as usual, he brought an entourage, typical royal affectation. He brought an entourage of a few hundreds. And he brought pearls and I think bird's nest and trepang. And trepang, as you know, is the sea cucumber. I have a feeling that it was from this point onwards that sort of piqued the Chinese taste for trepang and bird's nest. And we can link it to this moment at the moment because the trade is still very vibrant. But before I carry on, we've got to start how we got colonialized in the first place. And the increasing demand for tea in Europe and the Sultanate's lucrative trade with China led to the British involvement in the Sulu-China trade. The British were determined not to part with the hard-earned silver because at that point they were paying with hard-earned silver for tea, for all the tea in Europe. And they wanted an alternative, so Sulu was the only place that had products that China wanted. Apart from the opium trade in India, the British, via Singapore and Shanghai and Canton, they had no products the Chinese would want. And therefore, they had to initiate trade with Sulu. This warranted a visit by Alexander Dalrymple, an official from the British East India Company at Madras, who visited the the Sulu Sultan in 1759. And that meeting resulted in a Treaty of Commerce and Friendship in 1961 with Sultan Bantilan. And between 1761 and 64, there were another 3 treaties being signed by various sultans. Just to round it up, the sultans died, one was usurped, one was imprisoned by the Chinese. So basically, it's with 3 different sultans. Ultimately, the last sultan was the biggest treaty. With the services of a Sulu admiral in 1762, Dalrymple conducted a survey of Sulu dominions that included, this was the map that Dalrymple came up with. So the dominion of the Sultan of Sulu actually extended down to East Kalimantan up to, was it Balikpapan? Yeah, I think near Balikpapan. The series of treaties include the cessation of all territories in addition to Balambangan Island, which is on the north of Sabah. Right? And in addition to the island, it also included the islands in the south of Palawan, which is, I think, Mangsi Island, from Kimanis to the Strait of Makassar, a place called Tapaduran in the state of Makassar. Even at that point, the Sultanate's hold on the Sulu zone was obviously quite strong, because even at that time, they had controlled the trade. And of course, in order to facilitate the trade, they took on a lot of slaves or banyaga. So at one stage, during the Pirate Reign, these slaves, they were taken from all over Southeast Asia, and they were exchanged in Sulu and Sandakan and Kudat. In fact, anecdotal evidence that my friend, actually, his father went to Sugut, which is the northeastern part of Sabah, and met a woman who was enslaved by his grandfather. Because the people who were enslaved were given the name of their masters. So even I'm just trying to connect everything to present day. See, Balambangan Island was selected to take advantage of the trade of the Sulu zone, and it was the first attempt to establish a colonial foothold in North Borneo, to trade for forest and marine products in return for metal and ammunitions. However, the venture was cursed. I'll be using that word curse regularly throughout this because it's in the title. Back to the previous slide. Yeah. Balambangan was viewed suspiciously by both the Spanish and obviously Sulu, the Sultan Muhammad Israel, and of course the Dutch East Indies. So with all the external factors that were affecting the establishment of Balambangan, it wasn't auspicious. At this point, further down the line, I think towards the late 1760s, Dalrymple fell foul of the East India Company. And in his place, they dispatched John Herbert to set up a settlement in Tanjung Priok. Back to the Balambangan slide. Tanjung Priok, oh goodness, where is it? Was somewhere here. I think it was somewhere there or somewhere here in Balambangan. Unfortunately, Herbert did not have the statesmanship of Dalrymple. Dalrymple knew how to deal with the Suluks. And as you know, the Suluks are a very sensitive race. They have a lot of sensibilities, and I think courteousness is key to dealing with them. Courteousness and respect. His business dealings with the Suluk was fraught from the beginning. He basically gave them credit to exchange for arms, and he gave them credit for the products that he wanted. And they never sort of met with his demands. And also, John Herbert was also sort of defrauded the company, the East India Company. So this resulted in the sacking and burning of Balambangan by Datuk Tating, the cousin of the Sultan. So in this case, I have to link it up to Gaya Island, and that's exactly what happened in Gaya Island with Mat Saleh. That's where he sacked, I think, 1876. But the British hasn't given up yet, since they've got the whole territory to conquer. It was a difficult, I think from the start, it was a very difficult territory to get hold of, because it was full of mini kingdoms, fiefdoms, especially down in Borneo. And there were activities on land and on sea that was detrimental to any start of a colonial post. There was a second attempt to revive the trade, second foothold. So the first one was a disaster. The second one was led by William Farquhar, and it failed due to finances. That was in 1803. So they completely gave up on Balambangan. I don't know what happened to the treaties, but later on in the presentation, you'll find that these treaties actually overlap with the treaty that actually became the bane of our side. So the third attempt was the acquisition of the cessation of Labuan, which came in 1846 between Sultan Saifuddin II of Brunei and the British, and it became a crown colony. It was negotiated by Raja Brooke, who was the white Raja at the time of Sarawak, and it was actually more successful than Balambangan. So Labuan actually became a smuggler's point. You see, what happened was, back to the other one, what happened was, I think Labuan is over here. Sulu, Holo is Holo. Oh gosh, sorry. Holo was here, I think. Don't take me up on it, but what happened was the Spanish actually installed a blockade between on Holo, meaning to say they had to stop all trade. But the thing is, trade is organic. And the thing with trade is when you illegalize it, it goes underground. So Labuan became the stage of a host of blockade running activities from, I'm coming to Sanakan in a minute, from Labuan right across to Sulu, right? Between Singapore and Sulu, that supplied the latter with much needed arms, ammunition, textiles, rice, tobacco, and opium. I have to sort of backstep a bit. John Herbert actually introduced opium, the use of opium to the Sulu Sultanate. So subsequent sultans were high. They were basically opiumized. With the introduction of steamships, the Spanish started to gain the upper hand on the Tausug warriors. So at that point, the Tausug warriors, they basically had wooden boats, parahus. I think for 3 centuries they've been repelling the Spanish quite successfully due to this attitude they have. They're warrior-like people. And even now, that DNA, that warrior DNA, is still present in any Suluk person. You know, don't give up, die, you know, one of those things. Huh?
Can you define the word
Oh, sorry, yeah.
known to everybody?
Right, also sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah. I use the word Tausug also. I will interchange it with the word Suluk. It's because Tausug will give, the reason why I like using the word Tausug, but sometimes I use the word Suluk, so it gives them some sort of dignity. People of the current, people from Lupasug. Suluk, as you know, the name has been denigrated to kidnappers, thieves, unsightly people that we don't want in Sabah, you see. So I'm using the word Tausug, but then I can also use the word Suluk. But Labuan's direct position with Sulu was soon threatened by the establishment of Germantown. Now, back to the next one. Sorry. Yeah. Germantown is actually located in Sanakang Bay on West Timbang Island. Timbang Island, which is there. And I will explain why Germantown came about. Germantown was formed in 1863 by a piece of land granted to Captain Leopold Shook by Sultan Jamalul Alam on Timbang Island to set up a trading post. So even then, the Sultan was still issuing grants and treaties. Basically, Germantown was set up by 3 Singapore traders, Captain Shook, William Cowie, and John Dill Ross. So these 3 people set up the Labuan. They didn't set up the Labuan Trading Company, but Shook was a partner of the Labuan Trading Company that they that financed the building of Germantown. And they call it German because there were quite a few Germans there. Talking about Germans, actually, through my research, I found that Captain Shook, when he visited the Sultan was quite desperate at that point. And I believe that the Spanish were already knocking at the door on his heels. Like I mentioned earlier, they had steamships. I think the Sultan knew that sooner or later, Borneo would fall, one of the dominions of the Sulu Empire. So hence, he actually offered William Shook to bring a letter to Wilhelm, one of the Wilhelms of Prussia, to turn the North Borneo into a German protectorate. And of course, that never happened. Wilhelm of Prussia actually ignored the whole request. And I think it's also because of diplomatic relations within Europe. This is what I suspect. So anyway, Sandakan Bay was actually lauded by explorers such as Alexander Dalrymple and John Hunt for having a fine, world-class harbor. John Hunt mentioned in his report that the bay was completely under the control of the Zulus. The present Sultan during the life of his father was the chief of the district. The chief was named Sultan Abandul with 100 Islams and many Orang Idaan in the interior. The towns within it, so before the British landed, there were 5 suluk towns, and I think each suluk town featured a fort. So I'm not sure those forts actually exist yet, but they were located in Tausan Duyung, Lubukan Island, Dom Udung, Segalihut, and Tong Luliloko. So Germantown actually became a worthy rival to Labuan from 1873 to 1877. As the little steamships that were used by these traders, there were the Augusta, the Tony, and the Clita belonging to these traders, were actually broke the Spanish blockade. So, the goods from Singapore was brought by one trader, another trader would bring the goods over to Sandakan, and another trader would bring the goods across to Sulu. And one of them is William Clark Cowie, who was instrumental in the run on his boat, the Tony. Now, the Tony has got a really interesting history. It goes to show the gall of these explorers. We had a different kind of human being then. That curiosity, that adventurous spirit, of course, was all for profit making. So that's what brought them over. Unfortunately, the trade died down as the product of the first Sulu Protocol in 1877, where there was another treaty. In fact, someone should do. I won't even go into the treaty so much because there's so many of them. As a result of the first Sulu Protocol between between the Spanish and the British. But 10 months later, the fate of Germantown in Sandakan had an unexpected twist. The cessation of North Borneo, the claim that we know at the moment, would not have been possible without the initiation of a 10-year lease in the southwest with Sultan Abdul Mumin of Brunei and American Claude Lee Moses in 1865. Claude Lee Moses was also known as the Yankee Raja. This alarmed the British as they viewed Moses' Far East activities as American expansionism. Moses then sold the lease, the 10-year lease, to the American Trading Company, headed by Joseph Torrey, Thomas Harris, in partnership with 2 Chinese businessmen in Hong Kong. And together they established the colony Elena on the Kimanis River in December 1965. Where is it? Somewhere down here. On the Kimanis. 1865. But alas, the colonial curse strikes again. Disaster looms. Which is wonderful. If everything's smooth running, we won't have a story. Right? The colony was abandoned less than a year after it started due to financial backing, and there was a spat between Tory and Harris. And of course, there was an epidemic of some kind, so it was deserted. So bang. But Thomas Harris's grave now still exists in Kimanis. It's now an oil palm plantation. It's still there, the headstone. I still have to locate it. So the attempt, albeit the failure by the Americans to establish a colony at the doorstep, had suitably alarmed the British about American colonial intentions in the Far East. However, in 1875, a little bit a year later, Tory sold his rights to the Kimanis, to Baron von Overbeck, the Australian Council in Hong Kong. And it was financed by Alfred Dent of Dent and Brothers. I think they were based in Shanghai. They were a mercantile house, and they were powerful. So under great secrecy, in December 1878, on board the SS America, the Baron, accompanied by William Burgess Pryor, more about him later, who was to be the first white resident of the East Coast, William Prettyman, the first white residents of the West Coast, and of course Joseph Torrey, proceeded to Brunei to renew the lease that they had. Because the lease was started, when was this? In 1865, and they had little time. They had to extend it. Safe to say, the negotiations were difficult, and I think they probably had to twist the Sultan's arm. I mean, they had their means. I don't know what means they had, but basically, the treaty was finally signed with the Sultan of Brunei, Sultan Mumin of Brunei, on the 29th of December, 1877, ceding all lands in the northeast of Borneo, from the Pandasan River on the west coast to the Sibuko River on the east coast. After that, the party proceeded to Sulu. Back again. Sorry. Sulu. So from Brunei, they proceeded to Sulu. They dropped by in Labuan to pick up William Cowie, and they met with Sultan Jamalul Alam. At that point, the Sultan was already displaced from his seat in Holo, and they were at Lipuk, another area in Sulu where he sort of took refuge. And it was signed by on the 22nd of January 1878, witnessed by obviously Pryor, Cowie, Torrey, and Prettyman. Now, on a side note, all these people were given a huge mother of pearl as a witness. And this mother of pearls, apparently, this is a bit of a diversion. These mother of pearls are so huge. They're huge like dinner plates. And yeah, Sultan apparently used to serve dinner on mother of pearl plates. Wow. And sometimes there were still pearls embedded in the plates. Right. So this piece of mother of pearl actually made its way to my grandfather. Cynthia will explain later. So the terms of the 1878 treaty with Jamalul Alam involved an annual succession payment of 5,000 Mexican dollars to the Sultan and his heirs forever. The treaty was written in Jawi script in the Malay language. These terms would later become lost in translation and shrouded in ambiguity. Right. Oh, where am I? Right. So, on the 11th of February, William Pryor, from Sulu, fresh from Sulu, was brought to Sandakan, to Germantown. At that point, Germantown was abandoned. They had little rickety houses. And this is the start of British takeover. But you can hardly say it's a dramatic takeover, because William Pryor actually landed with 2 assistants and 40 chickens. Yeah. But they forgot the beer. Anyway, because I read his diary, and apparently he was complaining that they sailed off with my porter, which is like a porter is alcoholic drink on board.
Wine that was fortified with spirits that would last a long time.
Right. Sorry, not beer. Porter. Yeah. Alcohol. So basically, according to Mr. Pryor's wife, Ada Pryor, in her book A Decade in Borneo, the inauguration of law and order along a coastline of 300 miles, infested by the marauders and pirates of the worst type. True to form, the seas were infested with pirates, slavery was rife. There were constant raids by raiding headhunters, the Sagais, which William Pryor had to deal with. And a few months later, the Spanish came to take over. A ship called Marquis del Duero, headed by Captain Lupe. They landed in Sandakan Bay and gave Pryor the ultimatum: raise the Spanish flag or we will attack. But at that point, Pryor, I wonder how Pryor did it. Because if the others can't, why could he do it? And I believe from reading his diaries, he could have spoken Suluk. Because there was a line in his diary in Jawi script. So I'm thinking maybe someone wrote it for him, but you can't. It's his personal diary. So he has written. So I believe he had spoken Suluk. So that sort of improved his statesmanship to the local community. Because in his diary, I was time. In his diary, interestingly, the next day he arrived. He actually went he visited Nakodamea at Upak, Kampung Upak across the bay, and Kampung Upak still exists today. So if you guys want to do a trip to Kampung German and Upak, anyway.
Do you mean the Kampung Upak along Sagama River?
No, Sanakan Bay. There's an old cemetery there, which is quite exciting for me, anyway. Don't know about everyone else. I love cemeteries because it's a culmination of what happened in the past, and we can relate to it right now because it's got fresh graves, old graves, and the names. It just goes to show it's a microcosm of what happened in local history. And there's a reason why I love cemeteries. So I've been visiting cemeteries all over the world. Well, not quite, but Jewish cemeteries in Berlin and Germany and some in London. So at that point, Prior actually repelled the Spanish by just having the gall. And I think it's because he was given the confidence because the Suluks and the Bajaus of the Bay were his friends and they were totally behind him. And I think it gave them the confidence. All he did was, let's have tiffin, a light refreshment. And he goes, nope, sorry, we're not hoisting the Spanish flag. Bye-bye. And I don't know how he did that, but they did bye-bye, Back to the Philippines. So, so I think Prior had a main role in establishing the British presence in Sandakan. So the present site on Timbang Island, this is also similar to KK, was burned in an accidental fire, and he moved Sandakan to the mouth of the bay, which is right there, because he was confident enough. People behind him, people were supporting him. And the reason why Kampung German was built deep within the bay was because of the fear of piracy. So for moving Sandakan to the mouth of the bay, Prior had some sort of control over piracy, not total control. So with the backing of the population, Sandakan was finally formed. So this became the precursor of the founding of the state of North Borneo, governed through expedited development by the British North Borneo Chartered Company in 1882. So then took over the lease from Overbeck and formed the Provisional Association and subsequently the British North Borneo Chartered Company. So at that point, obviously, if we are governed by the company, it will be mainly for-profit venture. So because we were underpopulated, they actually initiated migration of workers, company men, private investment into Borneo. So hence, we have this amazing tapestry of different ethnic groups in Borneo. That is what makes Sabah today, especially on the East Coast. But most notably is the influx of labor from China to man the rubber plantations and the tobacco industries. So this venture attracted a bevy of companymen, Dutch and German tobacco planters, Javanese and Bugis from the Netherlands Indies, Japanese entrepreneurs. So we had Japanese entrepreneurs coming in in the late 1880s. I think notably, some of you who may not be aware of it, was the import of Japanese comfort ladies. So at one stage, I think Sandakan had more than 28 brothels. That's another story. And of course, the Europeans, the Sikhs and the Pathans, the Bengalis, the Somalis for security. So hence, they were all part of the formation of North Borneo. So in 1885, the census of Sandakan included 29 Europeans, 1,005 Chinese, 524 Malays, that term can be debated, 793 Suluks, 6 Indians, Somalis, and Bengalis. Settlers almost immediately outnumbered the local population at that point. So at that point, the border remained fluid, active trade and movement of labor took place freely. Sandakan even became the choice destination of Sultan Jamalul Kiram, because he had to come every year to collect his cessation payment, which he would spend probably on opium and gambling. So there you go. So in 1903, there was more secessions going on. This time it was the islands. For example, Bangi Island and the islands on the East Coast, and the payment was increased to 5,300. So this is all happening, and in 1949, the Sultan died without heirs, and hence, this is very relevant to what's happening today. The heirs took over the payment. They became the receivers of the cessation payment. After the dark years of Japanese occupation from 1942 to 1945, the state of Borneo finally became a crown colony. Annual payment obviously was sort of temporarily stopped during the Japanese occupation, but it resumed again after we joined the colony. Actually, we didn't join them, they made us join them. And it was only at the start of the sort of the formal decolonizing process that the terms of the 1878 treaty came under scrutiny, and the sovereignty of the state of Sabah faced unstable future. So but basically it was a curse brewing in the past. It was only ready to happen. The terms of the 1878 treaty became embroiled in an ongoing legal debate, as well as the feasibility of the Sultan, Jamalul Alam, rights to cede the territory in the first place. They used the word pajakan in the Malay, but this pajakan has been translated to different understanding. One is, in the Spanish translation, is to lease, in English translation is to grant and cede. So basically, these disputes carried on to this day. So during the Malaysia Federation, unfortunately, they could have taken this event to actually deal with the Sulu claim, but they didn't. Because I think it was a bit of a complicated process, and I think dealing with the Sulu claim was last thing on their mind. And after the federation before the federation was formed, President Macapagal of the Philippines laid claim. So the claim from the Philippines started way in the early 60s, claiming that the heirs of the Sultanate of Sulu had ceded Borneo to the Philippines. So we have all these overlapping treaties working against each other. So basically that's what's happened. This signaled a souring of relations between Philippines and Malaysia, and I think that still exists today. So this is a colonial curse that we're living through today. The Philippines broke off all diplomatic ties with Malaysia after the formation of Malaysia in 1963. Now, this is when the cliffhanger from last night comes in. President Marcos, when he took power, the dictator took power in 1865, he reenacted the claim. From different sources, and also from a personal recollection, was that Operation Merdeka was launched to infiltrate and destabilize Sabah. It was launched in 1968 with the training of militants from the southern Philippines on Corregidor Island in Luzon. The plan was beset with problems, and I think they had a management problem. Who could manage the Suluks? They probably wanted a general from the northern Philippines to manage the Suluks. They have no idea what they're dealing with. They should have brought in Mr. Pryor. Unfortunately, he died then. Including non-payment of salaries and some subsequent desertion of some of the trainees. The rest of the mutinees were massacred at the training base in Corregidor Island, just south of Luzon Island, with just one sole survivor, Jibin Arula. And this became the Philippine Army government.
So the people of the Philippines were training since
Yes.
mutiny when the Philippine Army fell.
Yeah, so basically the Philippine armies took a group of people from southern Philippines to train them to infiltrate Sabah. And I think they probably did that because of the commonalities in language and familiar links. But when it then didn't work out, they massacred the rest of them and became known as the Jabida massacre. This became known as the Jabida massacre, and anecdotal evidence from my big friend who actually knows Arula. Pirate knows Arula. And there was one theory that the reason why there was also a mutiny was because these people who are Suluks and Bajaus, Tausuks and Bajaus from the southern Philippines, they had strong familial historical links in North Borneo. And to turn them against the brothers was a big no-no. Because see, I noticed with the Suluks, when you manage them properly, they will give you undying loyalty. And that's what, from pirate, that's what I came across. It's just a matter of management. So for example, Mr. Pryor was so well respected by the Suluks that when he had to go back to England for holiday, the local population refused to let him go because they were so fearful of what could happen without him. At one stage when Mat Saleh came to visit him, suddenly Mrs. Pryor, and I think it was in a book, they had a collection of all the local Suluks turning up. Now, fair enough, but they were in war gear. So when the Suluks get ready to battle, I think it's like most of us, they dress up. they want to do things in style. So they had like the colorful, the jaunty hats, the big krises. They just turned up and they hung around. And and Mat Saleh left. After Mat Saleh left, Mrs. Pryor was quite curious why these Suluks turned up. In fact, they were there to protect the Pryors because they were afraid that Mat Saleh might. I think does everyone know Mat Saleh?
Yeah. Everybody knows Masala. Afraid of him.
He's
our hero.
he's our well-known rebel who had a spat with the British government, and he sacked Gaya Island. Without Mat Saleh, you won't have KK. He sacked Gaya Island, and that's why Gaya was moved to present site Kota Kinabalu. Anyway, he also kidnapped a relative of mine. Yeah, sorry.
Oh, no,
Sorry. So you were saying? I thought you put your hand up.
No, I did, but you just said something important as
What?
well.
What's that?
No, that your relative got kidnapped. I was gonna ask about something else, but.
Oh, my relative got kidnapped.
Continue that? Yeah.
Yeah. This is a funny story. I know this is hilarious. I know everybody go, huh? Hilarious. But I personally found it hilarious. Because what happened was in 1876, New Bronner, I forgot which one of them, he was a company official based on Gaya Island. And of course, he was kidnapped. And they took him off to the mainland, and I think I've forgotten which, was it Inanam River out there? And there I am thinking, wow, Mr. New Bronner, don't let our relatives know about this. Mr. New Bronner, tough guy, he was kidnapped, he survived. What did he do? Guess what he did? According to Nicholas Ridley in his diary, Nicholas Ridley is the botanist at the Singapore Botanical Garden. Apparently, Mr. New Bronner cried. He cried and cried, just cried and cried for days. I thought he was bombed. And I think the pirates got a bit fed up and let him. You see? Oh, thank God you find it hilarious. And this is the best part. He gave all his barang back to him as well. So I think next time if anyone gets kidnapped, you just, yeah, crocodile tears. So that's what happened to Mr. Pryor. Nah.
But I did still have a question though, because you touched on the Jabida massacre, and it's just like such an important
Yes.
part of our history. But why is it such a huge question?
Okay.
About whether
It's
it
coming.
happened or not?
It's coming
Oh,
up.
okay. I'm so excited.
The Jabida massacre, because as you know, the Suluks are intensely royal, territorial, incredibly loyal. And it ignited the uprising in southern Philippines. And it was this uprising that's affecting us today. The insurgency had long-lasting implications, and Sabah became a haven for steady stream of refugees from the southern Philippines. That's what happened. It's just really, really sad. This is another level. It's not just the non-payment and the desertion. This is another level I heard from Pirate, and Pirate who knows Soul Survivor. And I think in some academic quarters it was the same, it had the same stance. And they were settled over several sites all over Sabah, established by the UNHCR. As you know, I think you would know some of them. One is the big one in Sandakan called Kampung Bahagia. Kampung Bahagia, Kinarut, and one in Gaya Island, Pondo, which is called now Pondo. And several sites, I think I've forgotten the names, and there's in Tawa, and there's in Kuna, and there's in Kudat, and there's in Bangi, where I heard from the descendants of these people that they were training militants there too. So in Sanakan, the leaders of this uprising were actually housed and based in a village called Jampiras in Sanakan Bay. It's a very sleepy village now, nothing goes on there. But now Jampiras is becoming a bit of a myth. Has got achieved mythical status. I'll tell you why later. It's mythical status because people don't know what's going on there. And the reason why, I think I shared last night, why I sort of stumbled across what was happening there was because I went to Jampiras for the schools. Yeah, for the schools. So subsequently, and oh, by the way, the uprising in the Philippines was also supported by the Organization of Islamic Countries. And militants were trained in Libya. Guns were funneled via Sandakan to Sulu. And my pirate actually brought the guns himself to Holo. And this is when I'm going to get romantic. he basically shipped the guns on ship without lights. He navigates. He's a real Tausug, you know? He navigated. This is a skill that they have for millennia. The skill that they have, they navigate through the stars. You know, which is quite a lot. Even the Bajau do it. Obviously, the skill is lost now with GPS, sat-nav, the like. You know, so we're all becoming really more Bodo now, actually. Anyway, President Marcos dropped the claim, finally dropped the claim, and subsequent presidents, President Corazon Aquino and Fidel Ramos. Oh no, President Corazon Aquino vowed to drop the claim, but she faced a lot of opposition, the Philippine government. Same with Fidel Ramos and Gloria Arroyo Macapagal, daughter of the former president. Basically, the claim was never really put to bed and remains a thorn in the diplomatic relations between Malaysia and the Philippines. Now the Malaysian government decided to take the path of least resistance. I think in local language is make dono. They really make dono the claim. They dismissed it, refused to settle at the International Court of Justice. The claim remained non-negotiable, a non-issue. But the path of least resistance happened to be the biggest mistake the Malaysian government ever made. Because in 2013, I think everybody, this is now living history. 2013, they had an incursion. Now I've got another cliffhanger on this one here. Previously to that, in 1865, the pirates actually temporarily took over Lahadatu. So it's nothing new, really. About 200 over individuals, only 60 of them armed, landed by boat in Tanduao, Lahadatu, resulting in the Stanlaw. Sorry, that 1865.
So it was in 1865.
Sorry, 19. My God, how many centuries did I do now? 18. No, 19. Yeah, actually, Cynthia's father was called. Do you remember? Your father was called to deal with it. I still remember that. See, living history. We're all connected.
So the story with the 200, the 60.
Oh, sorry. The 200 intruders was actually in 2013.
So what you were saying, it's a replication of what happened.
Yes, in 1965. Anyway, bad with dates, so I don't remember birthdays. So anyway, the version was broadcasted in the mainstream media with the assertion that the claimants and the followers of the Sultan were making a bid to reclaim Sabah. Now that was what we all got, right? In reality, it's something more heartbreaking. That was propaganda. Because if you look at it, if you look at it properly, if you're going to take over a state, why do you send 200 militants in the far-flung, isn't it? They would have sent them to KK. But I don't know why that the media propaganda actually took hold of everybody's psyche, saying that they're coming to take over. And you know how many guns they had? 60. I mean, for heaven's sake, and they're probably Kalashnikovs from Libya. I don't know. I mean, homemade guns. I heard they had homemade guns. So this is the real version, I hope. I hope. Between us. Because in 2014, I had the pleasure to work with PACOS and the Asia Foundation. And we did a series of security dialogues that I was supposed to be responsible for the report. And a few things that came out about this little project. It was heartbreaking. Anyway, the ACP Hashim, really special branch head at that time. The question was from a Suluk woman. She cleverly redirected the question to Suluk men to ask ACP Hashim, just in case she can. I like the way they redirect the question. And the question was, are they all Suluk? Are all the intruders Suluk? And it wasn't. It was a mix of Christians, of Visayans, people from Basilan, forgot to call them Bajaus. It's a motley crew. About 200-ish of them with 60 guns. And what ACP Hashim said following that was made everyone cry. He said, they were civilians like you and I. Civilians that were lied to come over saying that Sulu has reclaimed Sabah and we're going to have a parade and you're going to be owning land. I know. But the real reason is from another sharing in Tanjung Labian was that it was basically they came to squat land in Tanduao. That was basically they had a disagreement with Felda. He took over land and disagreement about payment, the usual thing, the payment. And the heir to the land actually brought them in to squat the land, and they were lied to. And it was really sad. The second part of the report, I'm going to share because it's very much to do with what we're going through, was I did a very informal borang cadangan, borang cadangan. What are you feeling? What are the biggest problems you face as an individual? And what are the biggest problems that you face as a community? Two very simple questions. And because, being a researcher, I wasn't paid for this, but I was curious. I've got captive audience. To do that on the field will take you ages. And to be honest, there were more, like in Tanjung Labian, there were more completed borangs than there were people in the workshop. Which I thought was quite curious. Then I realized that a lot of them were stateless. And they were afraid that when they come to the workshops, they had the JPN, the army, the immigration, and the special branch, Majelis Keselamatan Negara, they were all there. And I think they were very compromised. They wanted a voice, and they came through my forms. And my poor assistant, he was the most popular person. He was at his desk, and everybody was climbing over him. And I did say to him, I said, don't forget, some of them are illiterate. You have to write it. And you don't have to write the full flowery sentence. You just, the main thing. And that's what he did. Some of them don't even know how old they are. Illiterate, innumerate. Like we had something like 400 participants in the workshop. There were 600 borangs. The borangs were running out. Some of them actually, I don't know what they did, but they took a borang and they photocopied in probably at the school. I had to rush back and print more borangs. I had no idea what I touched. In fact, the organizers were a bit annoyed with me. Because all this trouble going on, there was this commotion going on with my borang and my poor assistant, Jody, bless him, my late assistant. And that's what happened. But I said the underlying concern that I have is that there were more borangs than workshop participants. And that goes to show that these people needed a voice. And this borang, and even when they can't read or write, they needed that borang for it's a quiet voice because they won't stand up. Some of them attempt to write it themselves And the spelling was really cute though. Document, all weird spellings. They tried very hard, to actually express themselves in these borangs. I still have them, but they've been eaten by termites, so I have to throw them away, but financed by the counterterrorism unit of the US. Anyway, this is the real story of the incursion from the ground. And from then on, me personally, the way I look at it, I never trusted our media ever again. I mean, but I did think that it can be possible, but others didn't. They just took on what was told to them. And this gives us a big lesson to read between the lines, and use your own wisdom and your own critical thinking to disseminate the truth yourself. The 2013 incursion, as you know, that brought up so much feelings on the local population, because at that point, I think Cynthia brought a group in. I had some workshops done with CHD, and very, very intimate workshops, and about how they felt about it, and they all felt completely frightened, and I was fearful about what could happen, until my pirate said, "Don't worry, Tiger, we can move to the mangroves and I teach you how to catch crab." I thought, no, I don't want to live in the mangroves with pirates eating crabs every day. And we shared a whole group of ladies, or Suluk ladies, that they came and they shared. And it was very, I won't tell you who and who they are because I've forgotten names already, but never mind. And the feelings that they have, they slept with packed bags. Some of them packed their bags just in case anything would happen from the Malaysian authorities. They would have to flee. They slept with packed bags. Some of them say they were dusun. I'm dusun because she was basically in KK and she was basically, I think, running a market stall somewhere in Pinampang, I think. And she did totally deny her own identity. Another would say, oh yeah, she was born in Sandakan and I knew she wasn't. They started to lie, or depending, it's a fight or flight situation. But I must say, some of the badass Suluk ladies were actually defiant. I am Suluk. They became stronger and they became harder in their own stance about their own identities. But then this is all a choice. I'm not saying it's wrong to deny. It's what they can cope with. Because it was a very heightened situation. And at that point, what really affected me was the coverage in social media. That was so aggressive and it's still happening now. I can't remember verbatim, but I remember even my friends, so-called people that I know in KL, were talking about it that way. And for some reason, it really hit me really hard. But one of the most, this is the recent one, this one I actually remembered, but when, Kampung Pondo in KK, when it burned, and there were pictures of all these burning kampungs, and the comments were burn, baby, burn. Yeah, blow them up. That kind of really hateful comments that still happen today. This is way after the 2013 incursion. And I think media representation had a lot to do with this. So as of date, we have, you might want Pusaka to come. Pusaka is the Persatuan Suluk in Sandakan, and they do just the beautiful part of Sulu, the arts. The visual arts, the dancing, the stories, and that's what they do. And I think this is the best way to actually come across, not in an aggressive way, although they really want to say, F you, everybody, but no, this is a nice way to say F you, In February 2017, Sharimar Kiram, one of the heirs, initiated proceedings against the Malaysian government in the Madrid High Court. At that point, Malaysia did not send representatives to dispute the claim. They still did this dismissive attitude. And in 2019, I have to read this because it is so legal. I'm not here to sort of bash out the details of the legalities or the terms of the treaties, but it's here I have to focus on how it affects all of us. So In 2019, our AG, Attorney General Tony Thomas, offered to resume the payments. And don't forget, the big thing that Malaysian did was for 2013 incursion was to stop payments to the heirs for the Sultanate of Sulu. Now, this gave them fuel. So he said, okay, let's resume payments and make dono, don't worry about it, to the claimants, that the proceedings did not compromise Malaysia's sovereignty. A preliminary award was given to the claimants. It was only then Malaysia said something, and they filed a suit to nullify the appointment of the arbitration lawyer, Gonzalo Stampa, because it was asserted that the purported intentions of the claimants or the heirs of the Sultan of Sulu were to reclaim Sabah, and thus compromising Malaysia's sovereignty. So, they didn't give up. The case was moved to France, and in February 2022, the Paris court finally ruled that Malaysia violated the 1878 agreement by ceasing the yearly cessation payments, and it resulted in a $15 billion award to the claimants of the Sultanate of Sulu. And in July this year, the court bailiffs in Luxembourg seized Petronas assets, Petronas Azerbaijan and Petronas South Caucasus, to the tune of $2 million US. So now we're facing double trouble: sovereignty of the state and the arbitration award. So the path of least resistance, in my view, actually caused more problems. So this is what I've got to say now. The 1878 treaty was the source of many legal debates. Doesn't hold water, it's ancient, blah, blah, blah. What's the meaning of to grant and lease? What's the meaning of pajakan? What is the meaning to grant and cede? What's the meaning of pajakan? So, they're all over themselves. But the way I look at it, you can tear up a piece of paper. The claim is so deep in the psyche and the hearts of the Zulus that the paper doesn't make any difference anymore. It's lodged in here. And therefore, this is what is keeping the claim alive. And I don't think our government realized that. I remember I was at a talk and they mentioned about the legalities of the claim. It doesn't make any. Okay, fine, let's throw it all out, because all these treaties seem to overlap, as you notice. Who belongs to what? But the claim is here. And this is what we have to deal with. And it's a situation similar to the state of Palestine and Israel. It's here in the Palestine. So, therefore, how do you get rid of that claim? How do we regenerate from this ancient curse that's been plaguing us, since the start in 1878? So we local Sabahans, particularly on the East Coast, are bearing the brunt for events that I mentioned earlier, the influx of Sulu refugees. So at the moment, the situation is the borders are still open. Nothing's changed. The only difference is politically, it's supposed to be shut. So we're living in the East Coast and doing the work that I do. I do get to know something, not everything. Of course, there was this smuggling. It used to be trade, now it's smuggling, right? Now we have alcohol, tanduai ram. Used to be 5 ringgit a bottle. I think it's gone up. I buy it for my Christmas cake. It's great rum, by the way, especially the aged one. Making iced tea with rum. Turtle eggs. So that's our conservation, our conservation problems with the turtle eggs. Drugs, shabu. There were quarters. There were people being caught selling shabu. And according to Pirate, I said, Pirate, how will this affect the smugglers, our restrictions? He goes, interesting point of view. Smugglers are happier. Why? Because they can charge higher prices. Right? For cigarettes now, I remember buying a carton of the smuggled cigarettes for 12 ringgit. Now it's 35 ringgit. 35 kan? Oh, you got 35 also here? Oh, wow, okay. I thought if it's cheaper here. And of course, you get the unbridled movement of people through the back door, and they're still really active. And also, like I said, now that they've shut the borders down, they've stopped the ferries in the meantime. cross-border movement is even more active. So the logistics is they get a boat from the pasar in Sandakan and they speed across to Taganang. You know, like and then they disperse from Taganang to Tawi-Tawi, to Zamboanga, and that's how they do it. And do it very normally. I mean, Sabahans do it. There was someone I know who's from Cagayan de Sulu. They also smuggle across. But my latest study is the tangar bark, mangrove bark. So they also smuggle across that. There's also smuggling going on. They also smuggle in, so we have people, our invisible people. Of course, this increased racial tensions, especially the influx of the refugees, the unbridled movement of people. It also increased racial tensions. Maybe throwaway comments. Would you like a job teaching English in Kudat? What about the Suluks? I am a Suluk. It's like, hello, we are right here in front of you. And I thought, so these little throwaway comments actually, I think, is a link to people's psyche. Sometimes they don't even realize it. For example, they will cost our health system. There'll be a burden to our health system. Sorry, rubbish. If they have to go to hospital, they have to pay full prices way above we have. So they're actually helping our health system. This unbridled movement of people, from my own experience, when I was doing a talk at the hospital, is that they used to come. They have diseases, and they used to come to the hospital. And sometimes they come to the hospital when they're already really, really well in advance, like for example, TB. So there's a possibility of a TB epidemic, for example. During the operasi, there were lots of operasis going on after 2013. Sick people obviously can't go to the hospital because they're too scared. They go to local doctors. The army was sending guards at the local doctors' clinics to make sure that they don't get any access to care. Although some doctors, doctors are doctors, they're kind, some of them, they actually supposed to treat them quietly. And this is what, sort of all these little things, anecdotal things that I've been hearing, that's what happened. And of course, we have increasing intergenerational statelessness, which came out back to my report, the one that I did just after the incursion, results of my study, my very informal study. So I'm not saying it's representative. But what really struck me was after analyzing the data, 96% of people or 95% of people in Tanjung Labian mentioned that the lack of documents is their biggest problem. Sandaka, 95%. Mind you, I was in hotbeds of stateless areas, and 90% in Simunul, Seporna. And it's quite curious. They weren't even concerned about poverty. They weren't even concerned about the possibility that Kampung Simunul will be moved. They'll be jeopardizing their livelihoods because they need to be by the water because they're fishermen. The biggest problem they actually want to face is the lack of documentation, which I find is really, really heartbreaking. What else? I had something to say, something really important, and I forgot. Oh yeah, and the Ketua Kampung at Simunul, Panglima Ramli, we call him P. Ramli. Our famous celebrity from the 50s. P. Ramli actually tried to divert the whole conversation during the workshop to the issue that the villagers will face when they move the village. And he just tried to sort of went over that issue until it was so funny. A lady called Ross turns up to him and go, "Hello, I'm here." Panglima Ramli was just talking away, and this little lady tapped him on the shoulder, and she brought up the issue of the lack of documentations. But because Panglima Ramli was obviously a politician, so he had to sort of cover up the issue. So that was it. They're living in it's basically a marginalization of humanity, the invisible people that we call them. We can see them, but we don't want to see. We really have no idea how many there are. They are aching a meager living quietly, highly compromised, highly fearful. And it's sort of passed down. This trauma, I can imagine, be passed down intergenerationally. I have very little access to legitimate livelihoods, right? Some of them manage to get papers. Maybe they bribed or something. I'm not saying all of them are like this. Legitimate livelihoods, proper health and education, living lives that's lacking in every basic human right. So imagine yourself, like, I wasn't here yesterday, but to embody that and be on the other side. I mean, I only embodied that partly during the 2013 incursion where I was feeling very fearful. I don't know, so suddenly this fear came. Can you imagine living like that every minute of the day, even in your sleeping lives, in your waking lives? You know, I mean, for example, those ladies had packed bags when they were sleeping. You know, there's something they would just grab and go. They're all living in extreme poverty, in horrible conditions, very squalid, like Kampung Bahagia, incredibly squalid. But the uplifting effect that I found sometimes, because I'm distant like this with them, this way or that way, just finding the balance. You know, they still had the penchant to celebrate life, to celebrate the amazing culture. And it's one plus thing that I brought back with me was when I noticed Cikgu Hatta of Pusaka, the Parsatuan, they were doing a different type of dance, Suluk Pangalay. And this dance is actually quite lost in Sabah. So basically, the influx of the refugees is bringing back our authenticity of the Suluk population. I could see that another angle. That's a beautiful part that what came out of it. Because I do love the Pangalay. Actually, I've got a few videos, actually. So of course, this breeds intergenerational hatred, real hatred, and mistrust of the authorities. And it became so ingrained in the DNA, and it's basically, back to my original quote, it has become the iron in the blood. And this is something we have to look forward to. If we have to regenerate, we have to look to regenerate in the future too. For example, another little example of the 2013 incursion was because my friend's daughter now, she's a civil servant, and when she was in KL, the mother scholar speak in Suluk, but because she's with Malaysians, she will reply in Malay, because she did not want them to know that she's Suluk. This is what my friend said, Delilah. That's what she said. My daughter, who's an amazing dancer, classical dancer, said. So that was, I thought, they all deal with it in their own way, this embodiment of fear, and you know, that it's a very threatening situation for them. I was wondering, what would I have done in their position? It's easy for me to say, oh, you have to be a proud Zulu. It's okay, because they can't do anything to me. I've got blue IC, you know. I was born here, I'm a Sabahan. But what about those with no rights to our state? So next I was going to talk about the 2013 incursion, but I think we've already done that. And to close, our maritime borders with Sulu are truly fluid and organic for as long as time has it. Cross-border movement is unstoppable and relentless, like the typhoons and flowing water. And as you know, water always finds its way. Water is patient, through cracks, through fissures. They would wear down boulders. You know, water is powerful. So we just have to look at what's going on. I know it's a watery border as water, and how powerful water can get.